Climate, climate, climate. Yet again, centre stage of the Green Party's vision for the country. For 14 years, it's been the Caroline Lucas story, but the only ever Green MP is now stepping down. The party reckons, though, that this could be their breakthrough year. They have chances in 4 target seats. A manifesto built around big spending, big taxation and big borrowing. But is it a serious plan or a pipe dream? And can they persuade voters they're more than a bunch of eco-fanatics? Well, Adrian Ramsay is the party's co-leader in England and Wales.
Hi, Sophie, good to see you.
Really good to see you.
On a gloriously sunny afternoon, we went for a stroll.
How long is it that you've been co-leader for then?
2.5 years now.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So how's the campaign been?
Oh, I'm really pleased with how it's going. We're getting a fantastic response and there's a real sense that people want to change, but they're not really convinced by Labour. I think people are looking for more of a diversity of voices in Parliament.
It's interesting because you haven't really cut through in terms of parliamentary seats other than in Brighton. Do you think that could change this time then?
Absolutely, and the polls suggest that it's going to, that there's multiple seats where we've got a fantastic chance, 4 in particular, where we think we've got a great chance of winning, and others where we've got a really strong base of support on the ground.
How do you keep going on the campaign trail? Are you like a kind of caffeine addict? Are you like, swallowing Haribo every 5 minutes? What's your vibe?
I'm trying to maintain a reasonably sort of stable level of energy rather than the peaks and troughs, which are
so noisy. There you go.
Thank you so much for being on the programme. First things first, what is the story you're telling people this election? Why should people vote Green?
The Green Party is the only party that's being honest in this election in saying we need to put the investment in that's needed to restore our public services, to tackle the cost of living crisis, to transition to a green economy, and that if we do that, we can bring about real hope and real change for people. And yes, Labour's on track to get a big majority in the next Parliament. But if Keir Starmer has such a huge majority that he can continue to make U-turns as he already has been on climate, on funding for public services, then he won't have anyone to hold him to account. If we have a strong group of Green MPs in there, if people vote with their hearts, we can push Labour to be bolder on the big issues of our time, whether that's on climate or whether that's on funding for the NHS.
That's interesting. So Green MPs in Parliament, you see it, would be pushing Keir Starmer to effectively spend a bit more money on public services, it feels like. I just want to start by talking about the sheer scale of the new spending that you're calling for. £900 billion across 5 years. I mean, that is such a big number. I can hardly get my head around it. It's about 15 times the annual schools budget. I mean, that's not remotely serious, is it?
Sophie, we're the only party that's being honest in this election about the investment that's needed to tackle the scale of the challenges in our public services and the cost of living
investment,
crisis.
But that's not a serious amount of money.
Let's look at what we are proposing compared to other countries in Europe, because the UK is near the bottom of the European league table at the moment in terms of the proportion of GDP that goes into raising money from taxes. And the Green Party is saying that we should ask those with the broadest shoulders to pay modestly more. It's actually Labour and the Conservatives who are way out of step with what other countries are doing, and they're not being honest with people. Can I just say that the Institute for Fiscal Studies has said that the next government will either need to cut public services or increase taxes. There's a conspiracy of silence between Labour and the Conservatives here, whereas the Green Party is being honest about the action needed.
You're being honest about raising taxes, that's right, but I just am not sure if you're being honest saying that it's just those with the broadest shoulders who will be made to pay those taxes. Dan Needle, tax analyst, saying, a graduate earning £60,000 with 3 children will be paying a 72% marginal rate of tax under your plans. People earning over £50,000 would be paying more tax. I mean, these are not, the poorest, I get that, but at the same time, it's not just those with the broadest shoulders, is it? It's people with quite ordinary shoulders as well.
Our proposal is that the national insurance is changed so that everybody pays the same percentage of their salary on national insurance, regardless of what they earn. At the moment, people earning under 50,000 pay a lower percentage of their salary on national insurance than people over 50,000. I'm not saying 50,000 is a high salary. Someone earning 55,000 on our proposals would pay £5 extra a week. But let's look at what they'd get for that, because at the moment we have a situation where People are forking out for a private dentist because there's no access to NHS dentists. They're paying exorbitant rail fares. They're paying high energy and food bills. Green proposals are about tackling the cost of living crisis and the causes of why people are having to fork out those things. We'd all be better off overall if we put the investment in.
I absolutely accept, the need for investment in public services. You outlined some of your tax measures. You also would be borrowing though, wouldn't you? You said that you could borrow more than £325 billion to fund your spending. So that's about the amount we borrowed during COVID. Our national debt is already more than our entire GDP. I mean, how much extra interest on our debt would we be paying under your proposals?
So our proposal is that over the course of the Parliament, the extra spending that we would have on day-to-day spending would be funded by increased day-to-day taxes. What we're proposing is that by the end of the Parliament, the only money that's being borrowed
how much extra debt interest will we be paying?
Money that's being borrowed for investment in things like our school buildings,
You're
and
answering a
crumbling
different
hospital
question.
buildings, and also things like the money we need to put into insulating people's homes, which will bring bills down and keep people's homes warm, invest in our public transport. The reason why I'm setting out this picture to you, Sophie, is that these measures are about reinvigorating our economy. They have all sorts of financial benefits in getting more people into work with the taxes they then pay back into the system and addressing some of the underlying problems we have in our economy. The debt to GDP ratio we'd have at the end would still be lower than many other European countries, way lower than where it's been in the UK, certainly in the decades after the Second World War.
Your manifesto says Greens will not allow our country to be held back by fiscal rules. Choosing to trap us all in a self-imposed fiscal straitjacket is a false economy. I mean, did you let Liz Truss write that bit?
Well, Liz Truss borrowed to give tax breaks to the very richest in society. We're talking about investing in a future that will be better for everybody. And we need to bring about those changes because we have high levels of inequality. We have changes in the climate that are running away with themselves. And the climate experts are always very clear. The costs of not acting on the climate emergency are far greater than the costs of acting.
Let's talk about the climate emergency then, as you put it, and some of the green issues in your manifesto. You're opposed to nuclear power. I guess my question is, it's greener than using fossil fuels, isn't it? Nuclear power doesn't produce carbon dioxide or other greenhouse gases. Should you not be accepting that it is part of our energy future?
Sophie, if we're talking about new nuclear power stations, there's a very practical question here in terms of energy security and in terms of carbon reduction. And that's where do we best put the investment to have an impact quickly in reducing energy bills and in improving our energy security. New nuclear power stations, as we've seen with the huge delays at Hinkley Point, take decades to start producing any energy at all.
Would you continue with Hinkley Point, by the way?
So, we wouldn't commission any new proposals for nuclear. So somewhere like Sizewell, for example, that is not up and running yet, the new Sizewell one, we would not continue with. Of course, the existing nuclear power stations have a role to play in the transition that we need to bring about. But in terms of where we put new investment, we can have a far bigger impact far more quickly in tackling the crisis of energy bills and of carbon emissions if we put that money into renewable energy and into reducing energy use, things like home insulation, that if we do it nationwide, help everybody to benefit from it, we can reduce bills and keep people's homes warm.
Another way of doing that would be to encourage people to drive less, to use their cars less. Your last manifesto called HS2 doomed and damaging, but obviously train travel is greener than car travel. What is your position on HS2 now? Because I couldn't see it in your manifesto at all.
Well, the HS2 leg from London to Birmingham is well underway in terms of the construction, so that's clearly happening. The question is, now the government has abandoned the bit of HS2 that the north of England was perhaps particularly looking for, how do we ensure that that money is used to get better rail connectivity for the north of England and the Midlands for our regions? And so we want to see much stronger investment in regional transport infrastructure, including new train routes, absolutely, but also the investment that can bring down the price of rail, which is still exorbitantly high in the UK. I
wonder, do they link into the same thing? You're a bit puritanical when it comes to green issues. You're making perfect the enemy of the good. Nuclear power isn't perfect, HS2 isn't perfect, so we're not going to do those things. But maybe it's better than nothing.
Sophie, I think I've given you a very pragmatic answer on both of those questions. On nuclear, it's not an ideological question. It's a question of what investment is going to have the impact most quickly in bringing down carbon emissions and energy bills.
We, of course, saw this week the Just Stop Oil activists painting Stonehenge with orange powder this week. Is that something that you support?
No, I don't support that particular tactic. What I would say is that I do defend the right to peaceful protest, because you only have to look at what's happened in countries where those rights to protest are clamped down on, that you're not really living in a democracy. But what I would say is Extinction Rebellion, Just Stop Oil are different organisations from the Green Party. We're about trying to achieve change through the political process, through representing residents in Westminster and in councils around the country. And so, I'm not here to speak for other organisations that will make their own decisions, and I don't always agree with their individual tactics.
There's one other thing that I did want to ask you about. A recent health policy paper on your website condemned caesareans, said that medical intervention in birth should be limited. Now, I know that since you've said it's not your policy, it's been removed, it hasn't made it into the manifesto. Yeah. But, I'll be honest, I read that, and, bearing in mind we've had these maternity scandals, we've seen hundreds of mums and babies dying because of these kind of attitudes. It's kind of upsetting. How did that happen?
Yeah, I can understand the upset on that, Sophie. That policy is not in our manifesto. There's no way I would have approved of it being in our manifesto for this election. Someone found a link to an old statement that had been dug up from somewhere, but it doesn't reflect what the Green Party is putting forward at this election.
I guess it's like, the professionalisation of your party, that stuff like this can end up on your website. And I have to say as well, your deputy leader, Zach Polanski, once a hypnotherapist who said he could increase women's breast size through hypnosis. I mean, it sounds quite misogynistic, if I'm being honest.
Well, my understanding is that Zach has apologised for whatever role he had in that in the past. I don't know the details of that, to be honest.
Yeah, so you didn't realise it until it came out in the media, is that what you're saying? Or?
Well, I heard about it when it came out in the media a while back, but he's been clear that's not something that he in any way stands by or condones.
Have you spoken to him about it at all? Or?
Not recently, no.
One last thing in the manifesto. You want to decriminalise the personal possession of drugs. What does that mean? Does that mean any drug that you're in possession of wouldn't become a criminal offence?
The Green Party's focus in relation to drug addiction is that drug addiction should be treated as a medical issue rather than a criminal issue. So if people are addicted to drugs, they need to have support for how to get off those drugs and to get away from the power that the drug dealers, the criminal masterminds behind drugs can often bring about. And if you regulate the drug system, take it out of the hands of the big criminal gangs, then you can protect people who have become addicted to drugs or who may be suffering from having taken drugs which are not what they think they were.
What's your own feeling? Because a lot of people will be listening saying, yeah, look, the drugs policy isn't working, it's absolutely right.
Well, I think there is a case, particularly in relation to those drugs that are often called not hardcore drugs, that the amount of police time that goes into trying to prosecute people for possession is disproportionate to the impact, when actually the focus should be on taking the power out of the criminal gangs by regulating the drug.
Have you taken drugs?
I've never taken illegal drugs. That's just not something I've personally ever been interested in.
Okay, and thank you so much for the interview. I just want to end with a little quickfire, if that's okay. I know, I love a quickfire. You haven't taken drugs, but what is the naughtiest thing you've ever done?
Oh, that's a hard example, Sophie. I mean, people often ask, how green am I in my own life? Yeah. I do my best, but some things are easier than others, aren't they? So I do own a car. It's a hybrid car. I would have got an electric car, but there was no electric vehicle charging points near me in the place where I lived when I first got it. I've probably come up with a better example with a bit more notice.
That's fair enough. Labour or Conservative?
Well, the polls are very clear that we're heading for a Labour government with a big majority. If we have a group of Green MPs in the next Parliament, we can push that government to be bolder.
If you could pick any cabinet job, what would you go for?
Well, I think I would say Chancellor of the Exchequer, because it's the finances that we've been talking about today that are critical for bringing about the changes that we need in society, whether that's funding our public services or whether that's the transition to a green economy.
And finally, who's going to win the Euros?
Oh, well, I started off saying that I was going to try and watch all the England and Scotland matches, but with the busyness of the election, I've only managed to watch one match so far, which was the Scotland one, which is, as I'm supporting both teams, not a great result.
Yeah, not one to pick.
I've got fingers crossed for both.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.